Hello, everyone, and welcome to this PathOS webinar focused on key impact pathways of open science. My name is Nikki Lisa Cole from the Open and Reproducible Research Group at No Center in Graz, Austria, and I will be your moderator today. And our speakers today will be Lennart Stoy, Antónia Correia, and Pedro Principe, who will introduce shortly. Just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and that we will be using it for PathOS training activities in the future. If you prefer not to be visually recorded, you're welcome to turn off your camera. And we ask you, if you have any questions or comments throughout the course of this webinar, please enter them into the chat. I will keep an eye on the chat and will prompt the speakers to respond to your questions during the Q&A portion of this webinar. And this presentation will be shared after the webinar. And with that, we will get started. So our topic today is key impact pathways of open science. Before we get started with that, a brief introduction to the PathOS project, which is a focus on open science impact pathways. We're funded by Horizon Europe, and we have been going since September 2022 and are quickly coming to a close with August 2025. We have a diverse consortium with a variety of partners across Europe with diversity of skill sets. Our project is focused on aiming to collect concrete evidence of open science effects, study the pathways of open science practices from input to output, outcome and impact, including the consideration of enabling factors and key barriers. And we're bringing an interdisciplinary team of open science experts to this, including those involved in infrastructure and development, operators, bibliometricians and scientometricians, data scientists, NLP and ML experts, sociologists like myself, and experts in socioeconomic impact assessment and policy experts as well. Some key outputs from the project include the following, which are all available online on our website and on our resource hub. And we are aspiring to be a gateway to a wide range of resources that shed light on open science impact. And so we invite you to browse these resources available online, where you can find project results and outputs. Some that I'll highlight here include the Open Science Indicator Handbook, which includes indicator recipes, so to say, ways of measuring open science impact, and tools that can help you to do that. And you're also welcome to explore our registry of open science stories, which share real-life open science impacts. And these resources are designed to help policymakers, researchers, and institutions better understand and track the impact of open science initiatives. So we invite you to take a look, and we also invite you to send us feedback on any of these resources. Today, we have 3 speakers in our webinar. The first speaker is Lennart Stoy, who is an expert in European research and innovation policy, specializing in open science and higher education. Lennart is with Technopolis Group in Brussels, which he joined in January 2023. And he has worked on EU research and innovation policies for projects dating back to the Framework Program number 7 through Horizon 2020 and into Horizon Europe. And before working with Technopolis, Lennart was at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels at the as an open science project leader and secretary of the Open Science Office. And he has held roles at the European University Association from 2014 to 2021 with a focus on research data management and international research collaboration with China. Lennart holds degrees in East Asian politics and economics and political science, and he is fluent in German, English, and Dutch, and has advanced Chinese and French skills. Not many can claim that. Antónia Correia, who will be among our speakers from the University of UMINHO, is an information specialist for multiple European projects, including PathOS, Pattern, On Merit, Fit for RRI, and Foster Plus at the Scientific Information Management Repositories and Open Science Office at the UMINHO University. And she has extensive experience as an academic librarian supporting researchers in scientific publishing, visibility, and evaluation. She integrates the open air and Portuguese communities of practice for training practitioners, the Portuguese RDM Forum, and participates as a trainer in the Open Air Open Science Train the Trainer boot camps. And finally, her colleague Pedro Principe, who is head of division at University of Minho Documentation and Library Services. He coordinates the Scientific Information Management Repositories and Open Science Office with participation in European projects, including all of those that Antónia has participated in, as well as Open Air Nexus, EOSC Future, Open Air Advance, FAIRS Fair, Foster Plus, and RCAAP projects. In Open Air infrastructure, Pedro is working as a support officer and product manager of the provider's dashboard, and he is a member of the National Executive Council of the Portuguese Association of Librarians, archivists, and documentalists, and is also coordinator of the Academic Libraries Working Group since 2014. And now I happily turn our presentation over to Lennart, who will present Open Science Key Impact Pathways.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Just trying to go back because I got the remote control of the screen, but I think it's working. I just need to get back to the right slide. Here we are. Thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, I will be talking about the key impact pathways that we are trying to identify and explain a little bit within the PathOS project. So this is a bit of an introduction, both on kind of the methods to in a very quick way, but also the first results that we're going to release then soon as well, and over the next couple of months, because there is a lot in the pipeline to come. So, and if the next slide works, indeed. Okay, now. Before I actually wanted to talk about the findings of the PathOS project, I thought it was nice to just maybe show a little bit like the question why we're doing open science, and I think these and what actually the intended impacts are of open science. At least we can argue if these are all of them, but I thought these results from this Science Europe survey from I think at the end of last year were quite interesting in showing that for many research funders at least, but I suppose also for many of those, many of you and many active in the research field, this probably resonates with you. So for example, the certain values and goals of implementing open science, we see quality and integrity, which has been something that has been really at the forefront of like driving the whole open science movement for like many years. Collective benefit, in particular through the open access to resources, publications, and data sets. Also equity and fairness. At the bottom you see all these transparency, reproducibility, collaboration, participation, accuracy, equality of opportunity, sustainability as well, and probably different facets. So I think it's just good to reflect on actually when we look at impact pathways and how we address them in PathOS, that like a foundation for this could also always be that you look into actually what are you trying to intend with open science practices, and then key impact pathways, and actually thinking about impact in the way that we have conceptualized it is a means to check actually and measure and potentially evaluate and assess how far are we getting through open science practices in achieving these goals. So that's always one of the objectives actually of PathOS as well, to help monitoring and evaluate these kind of effects that come out from the implementation of open science practices. Hope that screen is moving on. Yes, okay. So this is just a bit of a theoretical introduction to actually the kind of the practical implementation of the concept of impact that we have within we try to adopt within the project. Of course, you will be probably also familiar that trying to define what an impact is a very difficult discussion that you can have with, everybody will understand something different in terms of impact. And of course, we don't have let's say, very, the final answer to this discussion, but we have at least taken up some of these discussions, some of the definitions that are broadly used in policy evaluations that you see here, based on these kind of logical models, where an impact is something that is something more of a long-term impact that goes beyond, for example, the immediate beneficiaries of an action. So, for example, we would understand that first you do something in terms of, on the left side of the screen, you finance, for example, open access activities or publications, repositories, etc., that produces certain measurable outputs. Again, publications, it can be a new repository that you can measure as well. That has an impact on for example, the reuse and the accessibility of results, which then produces hopefully some longer term effects. So, for example, there is a better reuse of scientific results. So just to illustrate this here, for example, an input and activities that relates to open access policies, description of that, funding that goes into these, the implementation of this. As an output, you could conceptualize open access articles in this case, or maybe also preprints, for example. So there are different ways, of course, to do this. I'm just giving a very short introduction here. As an outcome, for example, there might be a faster circulation of knowledge. There might be a lower access cost. There might also be higher costs for publishing it. So this is, of course, another thing that needs to be considered. And as an impact, let's say, where there is, for example, an increased speed of innovation or more patents citing open access article could indicate that open access has a positive effect on technological innovation. So this is just let's say, the broad idea of what we have understood as the key impact pathways. We can also do this more complex, and this is what I will be showing you later. I guess you can also already guess that from seeing this, measuring in particular the effect level, that's a very tricky endeavor, the outcomes and impacts in particular, especially when you go beyond the measurement of, let's say, performance metrics or publication outputs, and you would look into, what are the citation rates, what are the other, for example, bibliometric indicators that could show you that there are impacts and outcomes from there. But just as an introduction to the whole, let's say, framework that we're applying here. For many of you, this might also be a somewhat familiar site. This is actually similar logic that is applied more or less in this way in the Horizon Europe program. And I just wanted to illustrate this, that we are therefore kind of aligned with these approaches that are being used in policy programs and intervention in Europe, in Horizon Europe, for example, but this is also something commonly used by other funders, by other organizations, to try to think about how they actually create the impacts that they want to do. In Horizon Europe, and if this animation is working, there is a little bit on open science as well. You can see it here. First of all, you can see, again, the inputs. On the left, you can also see actually the operational objectives. So that relates, again, to the high-level objectives to support open science in this case. But here, as an impact pathway, just as an example, there is the idea that the outputs are shared knowledge that is measured usually through the open access publication in Horizon Europe, that there are results and outcomes that relate to the knowledge diffusion, so that I think in Horizon Europe, this is measured mainly through the certain types of citations as well to these publications. And then the impact is there conceptualized as collaboration. So they look into the kind of the publication networks and the collaboration, the co-publications of certain authorship networks there to approximate this as an indicator for the impact on like collaboration fostered through Horizon Europe. So this is actually one way of then thinking, okay, what is the impact of fostering and supporting the open science, in particular the open access element within Horizon Europe. So this is just the very short, hopefully not too long, introduction into this kind of thinking. What we've done in PathOS there, and now I'm getting the hang of the slides finally, is to check, first of all, where do we find evidence for impact of open science practices within the literature and also within case studies? We also try to look into what do we find in terms of evidence that there are actually causal effects of open science practices. So, for example, there can be, of course, effects of citation, all citation metrics, but what is the effect of the article being open versus closed versus published in specific types of journals? That is something that's quite complex to disentangle. So we're trying to look into this, but that is certainly an ongoing effort to make this more systematically. We also, and this is the other point that I already mentioned, is that we try to at least move a little bit away from the performance of open access or open science, so for example, just measuring the publications and data sets, which is of course very crucial for the monitoring and knowing that actually we are improving on this front. But then moving towards more of the impact monitoring, which means that, okay, looking into the effects of this, and do we actually realize the intended effects? And this is what PathOS at least tries to stimulate and tries to provide some tools, as was shown by Nikki as well in the introduction. Also, to some extent, in all of this is, of course, to find are there any certain gaps that in our knowledge, in our theories and methods relating to identifying and measuring these impacts. Which is something that definitely came up as well as a lot of learning about what we know and what we don't know in terms of impacts of open science. So overall, it's just an approach to try to be more systematic and to stimulate this type of systematic thinking about open science impact. What we did to develop these key impact pathways, how we call them, is we based this on a kind of evidence collection based on a rather big literature review. So I think we had more than 450 studies included in a scoping review that were then also recoded into kind of impact categories, and that we then tried to put into this framework of activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. To look into to find where is there good evidence that open science creates effects. We coded this with a certain aligned methodology. We validated this within the consortium. We tried to visualize this, and this is what I'm going to show you, which is of course a very high level abstraction of much more detailed mechanisms and effects at play, but it's something that when we look into effects of open science at large, of course, there's a little bit of a level of abstraction there that cannot be completely avoided. And then this is the last step for many of those. We're trying to enrich those in terms of the writing and explaining a bit more about the context, also the limitations of the approach. Also feed in with the possible indicators from this indicator handbook that was mentioned, and also with the example of these deep dive case studies that we're preparing within PathOS. The good thing or the interesting thing is you can do this when you do this as a two-way street. So you can always look into the practices and how they create impacts, but you can also look into you can start with the impacts and then check how much are they actually create, which interventions are creating these type of impacts.
5-minute warning, Lennart.
Okay, that will be fine. Thank you. If the slide is moving. Yeah, so I have two examples that I brought you. One is on open and fair data, and one on open access. These are almost ready to be published, so bear with me if you still see a little bit of some things that could be cleaned up a little bit. So for open and fair data, you can see we found a variety of elements in this mapping that we think can be structured along this type of framework. We identify for some activities, even though this is a bit flexible in terms of the outputs here. These are very high level ones that relate to just, okay, there's an availability of open or fair data, and also related to that is often the availability of open platforms like infrastructure and repositories, of course, that support open and fair data. Outcomes, a couple of those that we saw a bit of evidence of reuse, of improving reproducibility, collaboration, and also to some extent the quality that you can verify this as well. Then leading to a variety of different effects. So for example, cost savings, because data is openly available for access. There is somewhat effects of uptake of results by industry, something on trust as well, if data is transparently available. And then other things like the uptake of results in society, for example. And we saw this a lot in like environmental monitoring, for example. It's an example that we found quite a lot, that open data that is produced can be used for these examples. Of course, these are abstractions, but this is a little bit the way we display this here. And then in the long term, this is then where it gets a bit murky. Of course, cost savings can lead to, for example, labor market impacts, innovation, a bit of economic growth. But this is really where it gets very tricky to find and confirm these effects of open science. But this is the thinking that we want to stimulate, actually. If we say that open data creates economic benefits that are not just maybe academic, then we need to actually think about this systematically, how we can confirm this, and which put studies in there as well. And there are some studies, but of course, it's open science is such a broad topic, so there is still some work to be done. And on the limitations, I need to say there's always that our display is very linear. This is not always like this. The causality of these is difficult to verify. So that means, yes, we put arrows between the boxes, but that doesn't mean that in 100% of cases you will have these types of effects occurring. You need to think about, if you design a program, how can you foster these kind of effects? For example, if you have an infrastructure, then you can think about, okay, do we need to still do some other actions that can support maybe the impact to occur? And of course, not everything can be measured. So what we've done there, that's an important caveat as well. We base it on the available evidence in academic literature. So if maybe there are still effects that we just don't have any literature about, then it's difficult to display those naturally. And this is something to mention as well. So this is some of the limitations in this work. Just wanted to show this as well. It's going to be a bit difficult to read. We have done this for open access. We have in the end decided to split it a little bit. We have one here on gold on hybrid open access, where we try to identify these categories. So for example, there you see quite a lot of effects. Of course, the availability of open access publications. We know that there is some effect on citations of that. Of course, difference a little bit between green and gold. There are some nuances there, but by and large, we notice that there is some effect on citations. Also a bit of efficiency in the terms of people can access this and they're saving money, right? So this is something that is still there, also in gold and hybrid. Also in terms of, for example, the reuse and the uptake is of course always a little bit supported by these effects. Here, we got to say, of course, there are some effects. For example, here we mentioned equity. Of course, this is an effect. We have not here shown yet in which direction this effect goes, because it's a very big debate, of course, that equity can be affected. We want to explain in the text, and we do this visually, that this is a kind of a double-edged sword here, because open access provide some equity in terms of the access to the publications, but the equity in terms of the participation in publishing, we're very much aware of the risks there. That also came through in the literature, of course, that relate to gold and hybrid publishing, in particular the one that is against charge in APCs, for example. And that, of course, affects the cost, etc., which in effect has some effects on innovation and productivity in the long run. But these are then again the very difficult to measure aspects. And the other example here, this is should be appearing the one for green open access. Just if I press the button hard enough, we have a slightly, it's a similar structure, so we decided just to gray out for here to make it hopefully a bit easier to read where the differences are between the open access fields. The differences in effects that we noticed here. So there's a bit of there's still a difference, for example, on the equity and the costs, but this is a different direction there, because the costs are born at a different level, and the participation in open and green open access is something that we need to explain here. The effect on like the diversity and equity is a bit of a different one than with gold open access, but still there are effects here that in this abstract presentation we think that are there. And this actually that we found as well, you can see here that there are some very similar categories in terms of the reuse, of course, of open access articles can, by and large, provide some stimulation to certain levels of innovation and productivity, because the access costs and sometimes the speed of publication and then open access is a bit faster. So these effects you will see in all of the pathways that we create for open access. But of course, some of the other elements that when you do a deeper analysis of this, for example, costs and benefits, and I think maybe the colleagues from UMINHO will talk a little bit about the effects that they have in their repository might point a little bit to this, that you need much more deeper analysis, like on a case-by-case level, to actually apply these pathways. But we hope that they stimulate some thinking in, like, how do we create impact as a repository, as a policy program, as a funder through open science practices.
Thank you, Lennart. Let's turn it over to the Portuguese case.
Okay. Good morning. I hope you are seeing my slides. Okay, and we will do this presentation of the Portuguese case study focused on our national infrastructure for repositories. Together with, I'm going to do this presentation together with Antónia, so we will split here the presentation. For the case study, it's focused on our network of repositories, exploring the impact that this infrastructure have in our research and education institutions and in our country, also exploring societal impacts. The focus of the case study, where we explore the different open science indicators, and where we explore these impact pathways, it's based on the fact that this infrastructure serve the entire country. All research in the academic institutions have a governance based on the national body responsible by the funding and by the computation in Portugal, supported by University of Minho. So the governance is from FCT-FCCN, supported by the University of Minho. And the idea here was to understand whether the availability of open access publications increased, in one side, the visibility of the research institutions and, of course, the outputs, specifically publications, and the uses by knowledge-intensive industries and SMEs. So if, in fact, the fact that the publications are available in our infrastructure increase the uses by industry, companies, etc. The focus was exploring a data set of publications from only related with Portugal and with a specific time range, and we are exploring open science indicators from academic and economic open science indicators, let's say. The national infrastructures have several services. We are not here to present in detail, but just for you to understand, there are already over 1 million documents indexed in this in our national portal that offer a set of relevant services for the community, hosting of repositories, aggregation of content of other repositories, also hosting and aggregating open access journals, and putting everything available through a national portal. So you see images here of several logos from our Portuguese repositories, mainly institutional repositories. For our what is important to highlight in terms of the RCAAP impact pathway. So for sure, of course, in terms of inputs, there are, of course, those that are related with the resources, the funding, and the human resources, and those that are related with the policies and the legal requirements, as there are the obligation to all the theses and dissertations being deposited in institutional repositories, There is an open access policy from our major funder, FCT, since 2014. So there are also an important context. These are the things that we consider as inputs, several activities and outputs, of course, related with the support service that we provide for researchers and for repository managers, then communication, dissemination activities, and of course, everything that is related with the operation, deposit of documents, managing the self-archiving by researchers, and of course, the technical maintenance of the infrastructure. So development, maintenance, creation, operation, and update of the Portuguese repositories. In terms of outcomes, impacts, those that are more clearly academic, let's say, so increase the audience of the Portuguese research outputs. We are here just talking about publication is of course considered here as in terms of short term, and we consider the enhancement of and the efficiency and productivity of the Portuguese academic institutions as a long-term thing. Of course, there are several that are related with the economic, because having this mutualization, this shared infrastructure, reduction of direct costs are here quite relevant in terms of short term, of course. And we think that are also important impacts in terms of societal impacts related, of course, with the benefits for the wider society, and maybe even new solutions to address common challenges in the public sector, in the Portuguese society. Of course, these have a small effect expected, but there are we clearly think that in terms of impact that there is an improvement of the academic sector via the availability of this infrastructure. So this is why we are exploring, and Antónia will come up with some results. To explore some of the open science indicators, we have a data set based on the open air graph, okay, based on the open air infrastructure, as the majority of the repositories, the Portuguese repositories, part of RCAAP infrastructures are available through open air, so it was easy for us to use open air research graph as the main data source. To explore collaboration was important to consider as data sources ROR, PathStat, and Orbis, and Orbis was relevant, and Antónia will present that at the end. And for projects, there is an important API from our major funder that is part of OpenAir. So also the links to the funding, to the funded outputs were also considered here as relevant. So we have this number, 100,000 publications that we have explored in our data set. And in our data set, it's everything that is related with Portugal, the authors with affiliation to Portuguese institutions, the content available in the Portuguese repositories, aggregated, of course, and part of RCAAP, and also projects funded by FCT, by the major funder. And this is what the data set that we explore for our results, that Antónia can highlight some of our preliminary results that we have already explored a bit, and that they are interesting for us, hopefully also for you.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. So for the sake of keeping time, I will ask you to change the slides if you don't mind. So as Pedro was saying, I'm going to talk a little bit on some of the results that we already have. So if you don't mind, the previous still. So we trying to assess the impact of RCAAP affiliated publications, which means publications which are deposited in RCAAP network repositories. We did this analysis by comparing two groups. So all of the publications are from Portugal. So Portugal authors with affiliation from Portuguese institutions or companies. But we did two groups, one group for RCAAP, which is the ones that are deposited in RCAAP, and the other group is for the publications which are not deposited in RCAAP. And here you can find the evolution from 2015 to 2024 of the total number of documents. And from this first approach, we can see already that there is some advantage with open access publications because as far as RCAAP coverage is concerned, you can see that it covers approximately 50% of the publications open access, so, but only 40% of the ones that are not open access. And this accounts for the total number of publications. Then I'm going to show you two of the impacts that we are focused in, namely the citation impact for academic, and then after the collaborations. So we based our approach on the handbook, the Open Science Impact Handbook. Indicators handbook that we have for PathOS. And here in the handbook, you can find a description of what it means, and then some metrics and the way that you can measure this phenomena. And next slide, please. So for the citation impact, so we analyzed the citations for 2015 to 2024. Of course, if this was a bibliometric study, we would not cover the latest 2 years at least, because of course there is a large drop on citations. We found that the total number of citations is higher for the documents from other venues other than RCAAP, because of course there is a larger number of documents, so of course there is a larger number of citations. This is quite linear. Although we did not find an advantage citation for RCAAP affiliated publications, we do find an overall citation advantage for open access publications. And this is something that we already found interesting. Next slide, please. Yes. Then the mean citations. The mean citations are the average number of citations for each document. Again, there is a higher number of mean citations for documents not affiliated in RCAAP repositories. But this can be accounted for the fact that RCAAP is including types of publications that traditionally don't have so much for a citation tradition, like reports, dissertations, theses, conference proceedings. So the larger number of impacts usually is found for articles. And so this could be an explanation for this difference in the numbers. We also saw the field-weighted citations which means the citations within the same discipline, the same area of knowledge. And as this also has a large number of documents that don't have this indicator, so you can see there is a lot of information that is not available. And within the field-weighted citations, usually higher than 1 is considered above the usual number, because 1 is the number for worldwide citations. And
1 minute left,
those
Antónia.
okay, these are lower for RCAAP, and it's missing from most of publications. Then for collaboration, so this is also the indicator from you can find in the handbook. And next slide, please. we see that the numbers for publication are low. So we have a big difficulty in identifying collaborations between industry and academia. And this is partly accounted for because there is not a tradition of citation. Many companies actually ask not to be cited in the documents because they have confidential information. And we found also that RCAAP shows lesser contribution to the total number of documents, but a higher relative contribution to domestic collaborations. So in domestic collaborations, you find that, so companies and authors from Portugal, you find that RCAAP shows higher numbers. So there is some evidence of fostering collaborations within RCAAP.
Time is up, Antónia.
Yes, I finished.
Okay.
So next one, please, just for the fields of science. It's not also a surprise. So we found that there is more collaboration in medical and health sciences and followed by natural sciences and engineering. And to you again.
Thank you. Lennart, you can take over with future directions and recommendations.
Yes. So just going too far again, just to be very short here. So on these key impact pathways, so what in particular what I presented in the beginning, but I think also for the presentation from the colleagues of UMINHO, there will be some more deliverables and reports coming out in the very future. So what we try to do with these key impact pathways on the different open science practices, there will be a couple of short reports coming out very, very soon and over the next months, like several one of those. We have, for example, now the one on open and fair research data that will be ready hopefully very soon, open access publication one as well. And then we have a couple of others, for example, on software and reproducibility as well, that are at least in the pipeline. The idea is to really try to integrate as much of these different findings and results from PathOS as well. So, for example, these key impact pathways, of course, but also then a bit also on the indicators and the case studies that illustrate this as well to a certain extent. So if you, if there is, so I'm really struggling with the slides today. So if there in these presentations, at least, there is supposed to be the summary of the pathway, like in a written format, but also the visual that I had just shared. Then there's a link to the related indicators. In the indicators, we could say, okay, these are potentially the ones that someone who wants to use these impact pathways can find them very much directly, because there is a very large handbook of these potential indicators and metrics, and also then a short summary of the related case studies, like the one for RCAAP as well, of course, which is in very short way, but just to illustrate these different impact pathways. And if the slides were moving on, I would be telling you something else, but I will just give you the brief summary of that without the slide moving, I think, because I'm very sorry about this. That with this, of course, the idea for PathOS, now finally, Nikki, I don't know if it was you. So this is the example of the contents, but with this, the idea is actually that we as PathOS, we have our own little intended impact, and this is totally, the pun is intended there, as that we have essentially a toolbox to inspire and help like stakeholders to actually think about impact pathways, so that you for those who are interested in this, that we can help making much more the causal thinking behind open science impacts a bit more explicit in the work of, for example, funders, of research organizations, research projects as well, to help also the development of monitoring as well in this regard. And we're working together with, for example, with some other initiatives on this too, to improve probably project and program design as well, and just in general to to support this kind of systematic thinking that I've mentioned earlier on, and by that really help to create better, better research policies, create learning in this kind of open science ecosystem about impacts, how to create and how maybe avoid certain impacts, and how to make decisions based on all the investments that we're putting in open science, what is now finally on the screen, really to the best use possible to the current knowledge. So there are also some very general recommendations that I would say that come out of this exercise. So for example, to make better use of monitoring and evaluation approaches related to open science, and also to think much more about the methods and the indicators, including also like qualitative methods and case studies to identify these impacts, because not everything can be measured very easily. Often you need to talk to people, you need to make interviews, small surveys about the reuse, and this is all should be part of the toolbox in assessing the impacts of open science. Here I would stop. I would go to the last slide. If this finally, we're open for questions.
Thanks very much to our speakers. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, but I have a couple of questions for each of you, and our audience should feel free to continue to add to the chat if they'd like. Lennart, my first question is for you. And, coming at this from a sociological standpoint, I'm always thinking about the relationships between people and institutions and groups that have to be in place for any kinds of impacts to happen. So reflecting on the impact pathways diagram that you presented, I wondered if in any of your work with the evidence, if you have encountered anything about what besides, say, instrumentalist types of inputs are required to achieve open science impact? So beyond, say, funding or the creation of infrastructures, what other kinds of things need to be happening for these impacts to occur?
Yeah. Thank you. I think that is really a good question, and this is a problem of this, in particular, this linear display. We try to explain a little bit about this when we do it in the written summary of these reports. But what I think from various parts of the analysis and also the reviews that were made is that very often actually indeed some types of interactions are really crucial to create and also increase, let's say, the impacts of certain activities. So for example, we know from we know from a case study that we did on the data repositories, that actually creating user communities about these and making user feedback mechanisms part of these infrastructures in this case is really crucial to ensure that there's reuse of the results, that they are being applied in reality. The same, for example, for environmental monitoring. That's something that I think you were also very much aware of this. You worked a lot on in the citizen science as an open science practice. Of course, even if there's environmental monitoring data, that doesn't mean that this is automatically translated into some kind of policy effects. So then you often have these either, you need some communities that put forward, that still use this and put this forward to, for example, policymakers that pick them up and really create the impacts. So these are part of let's say that the mechanisms that would in our visualization would need to be in place to actually create this, or let's say increase the impacts, because indeed only putting resources out there openly, sometimes it's not, it's very good, but maybe some other supporting practices could make really a difference in terms of the effects on the wider community of these.
Thank you, Lennart, very much. And I have also a question for our team from UMINHO, for Antónia and Pedro. I know that within our project, co-creation has been an important part of the process for each of the case studies. And I wondered if you could share with our audience what particular value that co-creation process has had within your individual case.
Thank you, Nikki. I can highlight one or two, and then I give more time to Antónia to think and also. It was quite important, this co-creation process. So in our project, we organized some focus group that we invite knowledgeable and people to help us, and this was quite important. People from the RCAAP community, people from academia that have a strong connection with collaborations with industry. So this was quite important for us to prepare the research questions to clearly define what we want to have in our data set to explore. This was quite important. Mentions, for example, from colleagues from academia that have strong connections with some local industries, with the different levels of involvement. For us, it was quite clear that we are going to do a network analysis, exploring affiliations, or exploring co-authorship of the publications from people from the academia and people from industry. And then also some people help us to consider that we can get some relevant information to reply to our research questions from that approach, but be aware, this was also something that was mentioned by these researchers, that sometimes we do collaboration, but they are not part of the mentions as authors because they don't want, or because they just offer the tools or the mechanisms or the instruments for us to support our research, and they don't want to be mentioned clearly as in the authors. So we need to consider other ways to, but this co-creation process was important for us to establish the research questions and to define the scope and the data set. Maybe I'm missing something, Antónia.
Yes, for sure. So you said almost everything. I'm just going to add, for example, for the cost-benefit analysis, we're not presenting here today, but we also did this to complement our study on the impact of PathOS, of CAP. And we did interviews, and we, for the design of these interviews, we also contacted repository managers and also researchers to try to understand if we were doing our questionnaire right, to co-create the questionnaire with them and then launch it. And we also aimed to involve the community in informing them of what the work that we are doing, and also that we are launching the questionnaire to reach out for people to get more answers and get more results, and then present them to these stakeholders. So we are trying to involve all of those who are in any way related to RCAAP and its activities, be it the repository managers, the researchers, the people who are collaborating, and also, of course, the RCAAP managers and FCT. So we try to do it in a way that we don't miss anything from our use case.
Thank you very much, Antónia, and thank you, Lennart and Pedro, as well, for your presentations today. By way of concluding, I will tell you a little bit about some of our upcoming events. We have additional webinars forthcoming. First, on the 17th of March, we'll have a webinar focused on the academic impact of open science. We will have one later in March focused on the economic impact of open science. And finally, in April, one focused on the cost-benefit analysis framework for open science. All sure to be very interesting. You can visit our training corner to learn more about our various resources that we've produced within the project. You can use this QR code here or visit our website to find it. So we thank you very much for attending today, and just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available online and the slides will be shared. And you can, of course, contact our speakers if you'd like to follow up with any questions or to provide feedback. We also invite your feedback on this webinar. You can use this QR code to provide feedback on your experience within this webinar, and you can contact my colleague Teresa Simova directly at Open Air to also provide feedback about the webinar or to ask for additional information about PathOS training. So we thank you very much for attending today, and this concludes our webinar.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, speakers. I have to jump off now for another meeting. And Marilee, I know you've been recording, and so you will be saving this, yes? Okay. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.